excuse not to learn.
Okay, Boker Tov. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us once again. So here we are, Masechet Beitzah, Daf Yud Alef Amud Bet. So we just have a little piece to finish off relating to the previous Mishnah, and we're going to move on to a new Mishnah today. A very, very fundamental principle, fundamental discussion in Hilchot Yom Tov. Maybe one of the most fundamental discussions. So we're at the bottom of Yud Alef Amud Bet. We saw this Mishnah, the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel regarding these trisim, regarding these shutters that they would put on the doors or on the windows of these shops, which Beit Hillel said you can take them out and you can put them back on Yom Tov. We explained the concept of hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan, and also to do with the fact that there is no binyan and stira bekelim. These are not connected to the ground. So Beit Hillel permitted, and Beit Shammai said it's forbidden. So we're near the bottom of the page, about 6-7 lines from the bottom, where it says, Matnitin deloki haitana. Now, our Mishnah does not follow, seemingly, a different Tana that we have in a Beitzah, which is taught as follows. The Tanya, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Mudim Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel, shemesalkin et hatrisim beyom tov, lo nechlaku ela lachzir, shebeit Shammai omrim, ein machzirin, uBeit Hillel omrim, af machzirim. Okay, so we have a Beitzah which seems to say somewhat differently to our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, we have a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, both regarding taking the trisim out and putting them back. But according to this Beitzah, it says what? It says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Modim Beit Shammai Beit Hillel shemesalkin et trisim. Both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree that you can remove the trisim, you can remove these shutters on Yom Tov. What's their machloket? Lo nechlaku ela lachzir. Only putting them back. Beit Shammai omrim ein machzirin, Beit Hillel omrim af machzirin. Okay, so in regards to putting them back, we've already discussed that is the machloket of hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan. Beit Hillel allows, Beit Shammai says no. But what's strange is that this Mishnah says, this Beitzah says that Beit Shammai also allows you to take them out. That is not like our Mishnah. So says the Gemara, no. Bameh dvarim amurim. What are we dealing with over there? So it's different types of trisim. The word tris is used here interchangeably amongst the Mishnayot and the Breitot, but we're relating to something somewhat different. Over there, where Beit Shammai agreed, bameh dvarim amurim b'sheyesh lahen tzir. Sorry, over here where Beit Shammai disagree, right? B'sheyesh lahen tzir, where they have a tzir, sort of like a hinge or sort of a hook where it connects in. If you imagine you have this opening of these shutters and you have this big metal board that gets placed there. So you're not just placing the board, but it's got on the side or on top, we're about to discuss, but it has sort of a piece which protrudes and that plugs into the opening. That is the tzir. So where it says Beit Shammai omrim ein machzirim b'mei dvarim amurim b'sheyesh lahen tzir aval ein lahen tzir. If there is no tzir, so you're just taking this board and you're attaching it next to the window, so that everybody would allow. That everybody would say is mutar. However, when it comes to if you have the tzir, you have the sort of hinge that needs to be connected, so there Beit Shammai are going to be more machmir. Again, the question here relates to the details of binyan and stira. So since Beit Hillel said that there is no binyan and stira b'kelim, they're not concerned. But Beit Shammai say no. So anytime you have something which is more fixed and you have to connect it, it's more resembles more closely the melachav binyan. That's where we have our machloket. So we have our machloket where there is a tzir, but where there is no tzir, that's what the Beitzah was talking about. Rashi says over here, b'sheyesh le'en tzir. Right, 3 lines from the bottom of the page. He says yadot lishnei rashin. On the top and the bottom, I guess they have these sort of handles which plug in. The domot lebinyan, that is more similar to building. Now, but we have another Beitzah. Says the Gemara, Vatanya b'mei dvarim amurim b'she'en lahen tzir aval yesh lahen tzir divrei kol asur. So wait a minute. You just said to me that what? You said that where there is a tzir, that's where we have a machloket. But if there is no tzir, everybody says it's allowed. Well, here in the Beitzah it says, "B'mei dvarim amurim b'she'en lahen tzir," that everybody agrees is where there is no tzir. Aval yesh le'ensir divra kol asur. But where there is a hinge, everybody says it's asur. Not like we said before, where it's a machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. So now it's very confusing. Says Abai, Amar Abai, b'sheyesh le'ensir min hatzad divrei kol asur. Ein le'ensir kol ikar divrei kol mutar. When we say tzir, there are two different things that we could mean. Is a tzir milamala lamata. What we've just explained is we have this hinge which connects from the top and the bottom, and that really fits into this tris is going to fit into that opening. But there's also what's called a tzir, which is minatzad, where it's from the side. So there, where it's kind of it's a way to attach it, to make it stick better, but that is less similar to actually building something. So therefore, those are there are three different cases. There's a case where there's no tzir, there's a case where there's a tzir from the side, and there's a case where there is from the top as well. So he says like this. Amar Abai, b'sheyesh len tzir min hatzad divrei kol asur. Sorry, tzir min hatzad means that's essentially on the top and the bottom. That's what we've just discussed. That case, everybody says it's going to be forbidden. Even Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel will say there it's forbidden, even though there is no binyan and stira and kalim. Nonetheless, it's very, very similar. So, biyadin to Rabbanan, it's very, very similar to ordinary binyan and therefore would not be allowed. Ein lain tzir kol ikar. If there is no tzir at all, then divrei kol mutar. Then everybody says that is allowed. Ki pligi b'sheyesh lain tzir ba'emtza. Okay, the case that's machloket Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai is where you have the tzir in the middle. Says Rashi, the last Rashi on the page, says yesh lein tzir ba'emtza ke'ein plita v'tochvin oto b'chol shebe'emtza dofen petach hateva. So if you imagine you have this there's a sort of piece which is jutting out, and there's a hole in the middle on the side, and you push it in. So it's not completely connected, but it helps it. So it's something in between. So the question is, how do we relate to that case? So the top of the next daf, we see Mar Sava Gazrinan Tzir Ba'emtza Atu Tzir Min Hatzad, Mar Sava Lo Gazrinan. According to Beit Shammai, this case is similar enough to the other case of the tzir, which actually would be binyan and therefore make a gzera. And according to Beit Hillel, we say no. So bottom line is, when it comes to these trisim, in terms of putting them back at the end, after they've closed the shops, that is a machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel because of the tircha that you're doing. That was how we saw in our Mishnah. That was a machloket because of the tircha, but also related to the question of binyan and stira b'kelim. So it depends. If there is no tzir, then that is exactly the machloket. If there is a tzir, that's going to be the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel as to whether we say there is going to be binyan here or not. Okay, we're now finished with the trisim. We're now at the top of Daf Yud Bet Amud Alef. We get to our next Mishnah, which is, as I said at the beginning, a very, very fundamental Mishnah, very fundamental concept when it comes to Masechet Ochel Nefesh on Yom Tov. And essentially what we're dealing with now is going to be the principle of mitoch. Mitoch literally means since. In Hilchot Yom Tov, you have a lot of these code words, right? We just say mitoch means since, but what are we referring to? We're referring to the following principle. We know that Masechet Ochel Nefesh is allowed on Yom Tov. On Shabbat, all 39 melachot are prohibited. When it comes to Yom Tov, those melachot which are necessary in the preparation of food, right? Certainly the preparation of food in the kitchen that you could not have done before Yom Tov, that's what's called Masechet Ochel Nefesh, and that is allowed, and therefore you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, etc. What happens if there is a malacha which is a malacha of Ochel Nefesh, but I now want to perform an action which is that malacha, but it's not related to Ochel Nefesh? Right? Would that still be permitted? So we gave the example once. Tosfot gives us example in Masechet Shabbat. So megaben, there's an action called megaben, which is making cheese, which the Gran Shabbat says that is the malacha of binyan. That would be building. So megaben would be allowed on Yom Tov. You'd be allowed to make this cheese because that is ochel nefesh. The question is, therefore, do I say, since that is a malacha of building, can I now build on Yom Tov when it's not the tzorech ochel nefesh? That would be the principle of mitoch she'utra letzorech ochel nefesh, hutra nami shelo letzorech. Since the melacha was allowed for the sake of ochel nefesh, do I say that the melacha is also allowed when it's not done for the sake of ochel nefesh? That is mitoch. That's what we mean. And that is going to be the subject of our Mishnah. First of all, the Gemara has to establish whether that really is the subject of our Mishnah. But let's see. So the Mishnah says like this: Beit Shammai amrim ein motzin lo hakatan v'lo halulav v'lo sefer Torah l'reshut rabim uBeit Hillel matirin. Okay, so we're dealing now with the melacha of hotza'ah, of carrying. Beit Shammai say you cannot carry lo hakatan, lo halulav, lo sefer Torah. Why these three examples? So a katan, you're carrying a baby. Says Rashi, lo takatan kol mile de lav tzorech achila. Says these three examples, which the Mishnah is giving, are three things which are not for the sake of ochel nefesh. Here, you're not performing the melacha for the sake of eating. Okay, what is implicit though is these are all a tzorech mitzvah, a different mitzvah. What is the mitzvah when you're carrying the katan? So Rishonim explain, could be you're taking the katan for a brit milah, taking them to the mohel, whatever it may be, or maybe just taking out a child to go for a walk. Okay, so en matinot hakatan lo lulav, carry out the lulav. Why would you carry a lulav? Okay, for the mitzvah of Bnei Noah on Sukkot. V'lo sefer Torah, or the sefer Torah, taken to a place where you need to read from it. That is certainly a mitzvah. So says Beit Shammai, in all these cases, you cannot carry them to the Reshut Rabim. In other words, what is Beit Shammai saying? These are all cases, even though it's a tzorech mitzvah, it is not tzorech ochel nefesh, and therefore it's a melacha of hotza'ah. The same way on Shabbat. On Shabbat you can't carry, even if you have a mitzvah. This is why we don't have, if the first day of Sukkot is on Shabbat, we don't carry the lulav, right? We don't have the mitzvah, so that people won't come to carry. So Beit Shammai says no, you cannot carry on Yom Tov in these cases. So Beit Hillel matirin, and Beit Hillel allows. So the question is, why does Beit Hillel allow? Why did Beit Hillel say it's mutar? It's clearly not ochel nefesh. So conceptually, we could say one of two things. We could say either the melacha of hotza'ah, the melacha of carrying, is not allowed on Yom Tov, but for whatever reason, Beit Hillel said that in this case, that prohibition is waived. Or maybe you could say that there is no prohibition of carrying in the first place on Yom Tov, and that is why Beit Hillel say it's allowed. Okay, those are the two possibilities the Gemara is going to suggest. Obviously, Beit Shammai disagrees and holds that it's forbidden. So, Gemara now wants to know, why do we have this machloket, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel? What's behind it? So, Tana Kamei Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Hashochet olat nedava b'Yom Tov lokeh. Okay, so we have now a halacha, which was taught in front of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, which is the following: if somebody wants to bring an olat nedava, okay, so an olah is a type of korban, which is a kodesh kodashim. The reason that it's called an olah is because the entire thing is consumed on the mizbeach, right? That is olah. We have different types of korbanot. Some go on the mizbeach. The olah goes completely on the mizbeach. Some go a shlamim, for example. Part of it goes onto the mizbeach. Part of it goes to the kohanim. Part of it goes to the owners, right? You have all three. That's one of the reasons why it's called shlamim, and make shalom between everybody. Okay, but an olah is completely consumed on the mizbeach, and therefore there is no inyan here of ochel nefesh. Right? Other korbanot, part of them would be eaten, so that's part of the discussion. But an olah, so an olat nedava, meaning one it was allowed to voluntarily bring extra olot to the mizbeach, to the Beit HaMikdash. So here again, we're not discussing the korban tamid or the korban musaf or the specific korbanot of Yom Tov, which the Torah said you have to bring in the right time. But a person wants to bring extra. So you want to bring an extra olah, therefore it's an olah nedava, and it's not going to be eaten by anybody. So there's no need for ochel nefesh. Shchita is one of the 39 melachot. As we've learned throughout the Masechet, came up already in the first Mishnah, clearly shchita is allowed on Yom Tov for the sake of ochel nefesh. But here it's not for the sake of ochel nefesh, and therefore there was taught hashochet olat nedava b'Yom Tov lokeh. You're going to get malkot. Says Rashi, olat nedava ilu olat chovat hayom rachman hasharia. If we're talking about the olah, which is required as the korban for Yom Tov, so obviously that's allowed because the Torah said so. But this is not This is not required. This is a nedava, and therefore that could be brought after Yom Tov. It says lokeh mishum lo tasekom melacha. Right, you are transgressing a melacha on Yom Tov by killing it. So amale damalach mani. So whose opinion is this? Whose opinion is this that a shochet olad nedava on Yom Tov will get malkot? Beit Shammai, so I say must be Beit Shammai. Why? The Amri lo amrinan mitoch shotra hotza'ah letzorech hutra nami shelo letzorech. Di Beit Hillel ha'amri mitoch shotra hotza'ah letzorech hutra nami shelo letzorech. So again, the proof is from our Mishnah. Okay, so the way the structure is that the Gemara brings us a halacha from somewhere else, the halacha of shochet olad nedava, but we want to prove from our Mishnah whose opinion is that. So we want to prove that it's the opinion of Beit Shammai. Just as in our Mishnah, Beit Shammai says, Beit Shammai does not hold by mitoch. Beit Shammai does not say, mitoch shehutra hotza'ah letzorech, hutra nami shlo letzorech. Everybody agrees, if you need to carry your food, right, you are somewhere and you have your food is in Rosh Hashanah, and you need to bring your food into the house for your Yom Tov meal, not Shabbat, for Yom Tov, so that would be allowed, that would be hotza'ah, that is letzorech ochel nefesh. Do we say, since you can perform hotza'ah for the sake of ochel nefesh, you can therefore also perform hotza'ah not for the sake of ochel nefesh? That's mitoch. But Shammai says no. We saw that in our Mishnah. He says, ein motzin lo takatan lo talulav lo tzefrat. And therefore, if Beit Shammai does not say mitoch by hotza'ah, they would also not say mitoch by shchita. And therefore, we could say that this Mishnah follows the opinion of Beit Shammai. If it was Beit Hillel, so we'd have to say like this: since Beit Hillel said that you can carry for the sake of a mitzvah which is not ochel nefesh, therefore you could also perform shchita that is not for the sake of ochel nefesh, and therefore Beit Hillel should allow the shchita of the olad nedava. Okay, so let's just see that all inside again. On mani, we said third line of the Gemara. We said mani Beit Shammai da'amri lo amrinan mitoch shotra hotza'ah letzorech hutra nami shelo letzorech. Beit Shammai don't say this principle of mitoch. The Beit Hillel, if it was Beit Hillel, ha'amri mitoch shotra hotza'ah letzorech hutra nami shelo letzorech. That is what Beit Hillel said in our Mishnah. They said since hotza'ah is allowed not for the sake of carrying, therefore it's not for the sake of ochel nefesh, therefore it's allowed also. Since it's allowed for the sake of ochel nefesh, it's allowed also not for the sake of it, and therefore ha'anami too we'd say mitoch shotra shchita letzorech. Therefore, we'd also say that since shchita was allowed for letzorech, it's allowed also nami shelo letzorech. Okay, and that goes against what we said in our Gemara. So that is the first suggestion of the Gemara. Now, matkif la Rabba. Rabba attacks that argument. He says like this: Mimayta Beit Shammai Beit Hillel behapligi. Says Rabbi, who says that the machloket in our Mishnah between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is actually to do with mitoch? Maybe it's something else. Maybe what they're arguing is Dilma be'eruv hotza'ah leShabbat ve'en eruv hotza'ah leYom Tov kamiflegei. It says maybe Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are not arguing about whether we say mitoch or not. Maybe they're arguing about whether we say that hotza'ah, the melacha of hotza'ah, applies in the first place to Yom Tov. According to what we said until now, what Beit Hillel was saying was that in the first instance, hotza'ah is not allowed, but the Torah then comes and gives us dispensation for it. According to the second reason we're saying there was actually never a melacha of hotza'ah on Yom Tov in the first place. Now, what's the nafkamina? You could say, practically speaking, we end up at the same place. So maybe not necessarily. Because when it comes to mitoch, there's another machloket over here, which we have to mention. When we say mitoch shotra letzorech, hutra nami shelo letzorech. When I say that since the melacha was allowed for where there is a need for it, a need for ochel nefesh, it's allowed even where there is no need for ochel nefesh. Does that mean you can now perform the melacha whenever I want, or whenever I still have to have some need, some reason to do it? Right? In the examples in our Mishnah, all of them was not tzorech ochel nefesh, but each of them was a tzorech. There was still a need. There was still a tzorech mitzvah. So that's actually a machloket rishonim. If I say mitoch, do I say that applies now whenever I want, Or do I still say I still need a tzorech k'tzat? When it says Odra nami shelo tzorech, means Odra nami shelo tzorech ocha nefesh. But I still need there to be a different tzorech, a different need to perform this melacha. Or do I say no? It's completely allowed. That is a machloket rishonim. But according to what we're now saying, that ein eruv hotzah Yom Tov means there were never, to begin with, there were never 39 melachot for Yom Tov. There were only 38, and the melacha of hotzah was never included. Why would you think that the melacha of hotzah was never included in the first place? So it says the Gemara like this: Mar savar eruv hotzah l'Shabbat ve'eruv hotzah l'Yom Tov. Umal savar eruv hotzah l'Shabbat ve'ein eruv hotzah l'Yom Tov. Okay, according to this, Beit Hillel says no. Eruv hotzah that does not apply on that does not apply on Yom Tov at all. Why do I say that? Kedichtiv from the pasuk in Yirmiyahu. When Yirmiyahu is warning Bnei Israel about carrying on Shabbat, he says like this: Lo totziu masam mebatechem b'yom haShabbat. Yirmiyahu said to the people, don't carry anything on Yom HaShabbat. Why does it say Yom HaShabbat specifically? According to this, b'Shabbat in b'Yom Tov lo. That only on Shabbat and not on Yom Tov. Okay, so a little bit of background is necessary here. How do we get to this? Let's look at Rashi. Rashi says ve'ein eruv hotzah. Maybe before that, you'll notice already in the Gemara, at one point it said eruv ve'hotzah, and afterwards it said eruv hotzah. Is there significance to that letter vav? So seemingly there is. So hotzah means carrying on Yom Tov. Eruv means, so we assume at this point that eruv means that when you have an eruv, you have eruv chatzerot. That is a halachic mechanism that allows you to carry between places where rabbinically you wouldn't be allowed to carry. Obviously, an eruv is only necessary if there is such a thing as hotzah. So the way Rashi understands when the Gemara says eruv hotzah means that the principle of eruv, just like the melacha of hotzah, we have machloket whether it applies to Yom Tov or not. So Rashi says be'eruv hotzah im nesra hotzah beYom Tov v'nitkanu elchot eruvei chatzerot leYom Tov im lav. Right, that's what the Gemara here is essentially asking. Do these two concepts, the concept of eruv and the concept of hotzah, do they apply on Yom Tov? Now Tosfot understands it a little bit differently. Tosfot has a slightly different girsa too. See, Tosfot says Dilma. He says Piresh Rashi eruvei chatzerot. When we say eruv and hotzah, eruv and hotzah, so he understands eruv to be eruv chatzerot. By the way, it's interesting as well because eruv chatzerot is by definition drabanan. This is not the right. So says Tosot kasher, mai tzarich eruv chatzerot gabe Yom Tov. Habalav achi mutar tatam mechatzer lechatzer letzorech. He says, right? Why would you need eruv chatzerot on Yom Tov at all? He says, in any event, says Tosfot, you could carry from one chatzer to the other. If you have a need to carry, then you can carry. That's based on the principle of mitoch. So he says, "Lachen nireh la'Rav Reb Chaim Cohen tigarsinan eruv hotzah belovav." Says Tosfot, I think the girsa should be over here, and might be based on the fact that later on the Gemara changes the girsa as well. That it shouldn't say eruv ve'hotzah; it should rather say eruv hotzah. And what does that mean? Vachi perusho im isur hotzah. Right, so it's not talking about the principle of the word eruv means to mix in. So it's not, according to Tosfot, not talking here about eruvei chatzerot, but it's saying eruv hotzah is hotzah mixed in amongst the other melachot when it comes to Yom Tov. Afal gav she'im melacha grua v'im sheich isur hotzah im lo kamiflegei. Okay, this is a Tosfot right at the Rishonim, right at the beginning of Masechet Shabbat, tell us that the melacha of hotzah is a melacha grua. What does that mean? It means that it's an inferior melacha. Masechet Shabbat begins with the first Mishnah discussing some of the laws of hotzah. And say hotzah is a melacha grua. Why is hotzah considered an inferior melacha? What does that mean? Why should that be? So one of the Rishonim writes, and I think it's the Or Zarah, if I recall correctly, says that when it comes to all the other melachot of Shabbat and Yom Tov, So melacha is creative activity. When you perform a melacha, you are changing something. You're affecting a change in the object. If I write, if I cook, right, I'm taking raw food and it's now cooked food. It's different. If I build something I had before, pieces of whatever I had, and I've turned it into a structure. If I cook, if I sew, if I weave, if I write, right, every melacha, I can see very clearly what the creative activity is. What is the creative activity of hotza'ah? Says the Rishonim, you say hayah chefetz v'nishar chefetz. The object that you have, beforehand it was in Reshut HaYachid and now it's in Reshut HaRabim, or vice versa. But it's still the same thing. It's still the same object. Nothing has changed. There's been no creative change in that object, so to speak. So that's one explanation given why this is a melacha grew up. And maybe intuitively, we may think of hotza'ah a little bit differently to the way that we look at the other melachot. So based on this, the Gemara in Shabbat, therefore, later on in Perek HaZorek, tells us something else. So have a look at Rashi here. Ein eruv hotza'ah. He says, Af al gav deikar hotza'ah mi vayaviru kol b'machaneh nafkalan. Okay, says the Gemara in Shabbat of Tzadik Vav Amud Bet, that where do we learn the Yisura of hotza'ah from? We don't have a specific pasuk for all the other melachot. It says, Lo ta'aseh kol melacha. Lo ta'aseh kol melacha. Don't do any melacha. And we learn out from the juxtaposition of Shabbat to the Mishkan, that is how those are the melachot. But hotza'ah we learn from a different place. We learn specifically from the pasuk of ve'aviru kol b'machaneh. This is after the people brought their nedavot, brought their donations for the Mishkan, right? And it says Beitzah Moshe ve'aviru kol b'machaneh le'mor ish ve'isha yasu od melacha le'tumat hakodesh. The Gemara learns out from that pasuk that Moshe was telling the people, don't bring more trumot, don't bring the trumot from your tents, which are Reshut HaYachid, to the Machaneh Leviyah, to around the Mishkan, which is the Reshut HaRabim. So that is the melacha of hotza'ah, and because it's a melacha grua, we needed to learn it from a specific place as well. So that is where we learn the melacha of hotza'ah from. But then continues Rashi. By Yirmiyah, later on, Yirmiyah comes along, upilesh, and he explains. According to the Svara, we're right now in the Gemara, Shelo nesra ela b'Shabbat. He says b'Yom HaShabbat. So that's explaining that this Isur of Hotza'ah was only related to Shabbat, right, but not on Yom Tov. Umishomachi kashalu, and therefore that's why it would be allowed. So aval shchita, when it comes to shchita, she av melacha ubichlal lo taseh kol melacha. Shchita is like all the other melachot. That is part of that precept of lo taseh kol melacha. Ein melacha afilu lebeit Hillel imutra letzorech lo utra shelo letzorech vach maninin afilu beit Hillel. Okay, so then we could argue that based on that, and Beit Hillel would agree that when it comes to shchita, we don't say mitoch. Okay, so just to sum up where we're up to, and then we'll stop. We'll carry on tomorrow. Our Mishnah brought a machloket. In Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, can you carry when it's not for the sake of ochel nefesh? First explanation in our Gemara, and then our Gemara, based on the question of olat nedava, said like this. First explanation was the one who says that you shochet olat nedava gets malkot. That has to be Beit Shammai, because you have to say in order to say you get malkot, you have to say we don't hold the principle of mitoch. And a simple way of learning our Mishnah is that Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai argued about mitoch. Then says the Gemara, wait a minute, not necessarily. Maybe Beit Hillel also doesn't hold by, maybe nobody holds by mitoch. But the reason that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel argued in the Mishnah was because whether there is a melacha of hotza'ah in the first place on Yom Tov or not, that Beit Shammai say yes there is, Beit Hillel say no there's not. But if we accept that, we're not finished, but if we accept that, we could say that Beit Hillel also don't hold mitoch, and that the shochet olat nedava works according to their opinion as well. Okay, we'll pick it up from there tomorrow. Bezrat Hashem. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sure.